The recognition of higher states of consciousness as real and transformative experiences is a recurring theme across all cultures throughout history. What is it that upholds our everyday awareness, the continuous cycle of waking, dreaming, and sleeping? In this podcast, we explore the nature of consciousness and self-realization. We'll engage with thought leaders, authors, scientists, and practitioners who share their paths to deeper awareness and fulfillment. The simplest state of awareness is a self-referral state, a field of all possibilities. As Sir Arthur Eddington famously stated, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. Likewise, the ancient Yoga Vasishta teaches that this world appears material, but is ultimately pure consciousness. These insights illustrate that consciousness is all there is, and we are not in the world. The world is within us. Welcome to Simplest State, where we examine these understandings and explore the development of consciousness. Hello everyone, and welcome to Simplest State. On previous episodes of this podcast, we've focused more on the experiences of higher states of consciousness and enhanced creativity. Our emphasis has very much been on the subjective experiences. Today is going to be a bit different, as we're going to speak about the objective component of consciousness, the measurable correlates of consciousness as they are exhibited in the physiology. Our guest today is Dr. Robert Keith Wallace. Dr. Wallace is a pioneering researcher on the physiology of consciousness, and his work inspired hundreds of studies on the benefits of meditation and mind-body medicine. Dr. Wallace's findings have been published in Science, American Journal of Physiology, and Scientific American. Dr. Wallace received his Bachelor of Science in Physics and his PhD in Physiology from UCLA, and he conducted postgraduate research at Harvard University. Dr. Wallace is the founding president and member of the Board of Trustees of Maharishi International University. Keith is the author of a number of books, including Dharma Parenting, Gut Crisis, and the Rest and Repair Diet. Dr. Robert Keith Wallace, welcome to Simplest State.
Thank you, Ron.
I think it's fair to say that in your research at Harvard, you were the first scientist to conduct systematic, controlled, methodical research on meditation and different states of consciousness. And this was back in, 1970, 71, too?
Yeah, it's actually first done at UCLA, 1967 to 1970.
And at that time, hardly anyone was even aware of any meditation practice or yoga and had no concept of higher states of consciousness. So what drew you at that time to the study of meditation and consciousness, and what inspired you to do this research?
Well, at the time, there had been a little research done. I mean, there was some research done in Japan on Zen meditators, where they showed more alpha waves. There was a little research in India. They had buried a yogi in an airtight pit to see if he would survive. The more sensational approach. But I had learned Transcendental Meditation from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi many years before. And I was traveling in Germany with Maharishi at one point, and they were doing some measurements. And it occurred to me that, wow, this was an incredible field. I should do something. And nothing had been published at that point. People had been trying things out. Maharishi himself had really tried to encourage scientists to do this type of research. So I went back to UCLA and I managed to, in a few days, get into the physiology department, get a really great advisor, get a grant from the National Institutes of Health, and get access to one of the best laboratories in the world where they were studying the astronauts. So it had this very sophisticated EEG analysis programs. And then I had the cooperation of a number of other doctors there to do blood tests. So very quickly, I had a wonderful setup. I was really kind of inspired by the fact that nobody had done anything. And here I was, about to do this. And so I just went full blast into it. And in about 3 years, I completed the research. Probably took me less than that. And I was really amazed by the results. And I had a wonderful postdoc who was very sweet. And he said, look, you could probably get this published even before you get your PhD thesis. And to me, that just seemed, wow, that's amazing. I could do that. And so he helped me write up a paper on all my results. And I submitted it to probably the most prestigious journal at the time, Science, and they accepted it. So it really happened in a very natural, easy way without much forcing or doing anything. It was very widely accepted. And I went on to Harvard and then did more research. And that was then accepted in another journal. And eventually it went on to Scientific American. And subsequent to this initial research, there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies that have expanded upon it and looked more deeply at it. So it was just the beginning of a huge wave of scientific research. And literally, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time with the right teacher.
What would you say were the key findings of the research?
Well, the EEG was very interesting. It was similar to what you saw in these Zen meditators, but they've been doing it for 30 years, and they showed this increase in alpha wave activity in the frontal areas of the brain. And with the TM meditators, you could get people who were just learned it. And Transcendental Meditation was so effective that even beginners could get the results. So that made it a lot easier. I didn't have to go to some monastery, try to set something up and look at more advanced people. I could just invite people into my laboratory who had learned TM after a few months. And I saw something very similar with this increase in alpha wave activity in the frontal areas of the brain. And subsequent to that time, researchers have shown that it's not only this increase in alpha, but also an increase of what's called alpha coherence.
What is the significance of the increased alpha?
The increased alpha was indicative of a state of relaxation in which the person was awake. When you go to sleep, you go from fast wave activity, maybe 30 to 40 cycles per second, to very slow wave activity, 2 to 5 to 6 cycles per second. And then the alpha wave is usually thought of as between 8 and 12 cycles per second. So it's, 8 or 10 waves per second. A very rhythmical, very beautiful. You see these bursts too when people had the experience of transcending. You just see these beautiful alpha bursts that were across all the different parts of the brain, particularly in the frontal part of the brain. But this was later identified as increased EEG coherence. When one part of the brain communicates with another, the waves have a very similar pattern. It's almost like there's a communication between the parts of the brain. And when you have that communication, then there's a measure called either EEG synchronization or EEG coherence, where you can see this deeper level of integration in the brain. And that was very apparent even in this first research. And then we also saw that oxygen consumption decreased, respiration rate decreased. So there was this greater rest in the physiology. And then we looked at a number of components of the blood, like blood lactate and other measures. Blood lactate is often associated with anxiety. That went down. And again, subsequent to that initial research, all kinds of hormones have been measured, different neurotransmitters have been measured. People have looked at the respiration rate. Another thing I measured was something called galvanic skin resistance, which is really a measure of relaxation. You put some electrodes across the hand and you look how a current flows. And in simple terms, if you're nervous, you're sweating, flows more freely. If you're more relaxed, the resistance goes up. So that changed. Pretty much everything I wanted to measure changed. So this was quite amazing. And what it really indicated was that TM produced a state of consciousness different than waking, dreaming, or sleeping. And when we correlated it with the experience of the people, it was correlated with this experience of transcending or pure consciousness. So we talked about it in the first paper as a fourth major state of consciousness. You can look at all different activities in waking state. Sometimes you get alpha, sometimes you get beta. What's unique in TM is this combination of restful alertness, where the body is in a deep state of rest, but the mind is still awake. And a lot of other techniques have been measured now. There's a huge amount of research out there, far more sophisticated. You can do brain scans now, so you can look at specific areas of the brain and see how they're affected during TM or other techniques. So it's a huge amount of research in this area. It opened up the whole realm of the objective study of subjective experiences during meditation.
How do you, as a physiologist, define state of consciousness?
From a physiological point of view, you're looking at, okay, you see a person's awake. It's pretty simple. And then you look at all the different measurements, and the EEG can range from this very active state. You can get alpha. It usually comes when you close the eyes, and it's usually in the back of the brain. The alpha in the front part of the brain is a little bit more unique. So, a state of consciousness like waking can have all kinds of variety of subjective experience and a wide range of physiological experiences. Sleep state is something which we can subjectively experience, but you can now physiologically look and see very different EEG, this very slow wave activity. Now we know there's all kinds of interesting things that are going on during sleep. You're cleaning toxins, so-called lymphatic system. There's all kinds of unique physiological processes. So, and dreaming is another interesting state, primarily identified through EEG, where they would look at these certain kinds of activity. It's almost like you're awake during sleep. Suddenly the slow waves go into a much faster wave activity, and then the eyes are twitching. So this is rapid eye movement, and that's associated with dreams. So scientists have sort of looked at these different states, tried to correlate them with the physiology, and come up with these different definitions of states of consciousness, both objectively and subjectively.
People know when they're awake. They know that they are in deep sleep. They don't experience it at the time, but they know they've had sleep, and they know they've had dreams. But now, if I were to just lay down and close my eyes and not move, that looks, from the outside, it appears to be sleep. But obviously it isn't, because I'm awake and I'm just closing my eyes. So to you as a physiology, what defines that waking state? What distinguishes it from actual sleep?
Well, I'd have to put some electrodes, preferably on top of your scalp, not in your brain.
I'd prefer that as well.
Good. That would be the normal way to do it. I mean, they actually have done, in people with epilepsy, they sometimes do insert electrodes. So just wanted to offer you that opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
And so they would paste these electrodes on the surface of the brain. And then you'd look at it and you'd see, okay, you'd watch and you could just see what's happening. And there's sort of a transition where it's going from this very fast activity to these alpha waves, and then boom, right into the slow wave sleep. And there are 4 different stages of sleep. So you can characterize even within sleep substages. And then you can tell, when there's dreaming by looking at, if you put some electrodes here, rapid eye movements, and then all of a sudden they look like they're asleep. People report they're asleep, but suddenly you see this different EEG, different activity of the eye. The only way you can really tell for sure is by looking at different physiological measures, particularly EEG.
It's those physiological changes then that define it as a different state of consciousness.
From the point of view of science.
From objective, right? I mean,
Right.
subjectively, we have a different experience,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
And in your research, you talk about a hypometabolic state.
Yeah.
Explain that concept a bit more.
The notion is you're operating in a normal metabolic rate, which just means kind of how much oxygen you're burning per minute. It's sort of like an engine operating in a car. So then you look at oxygen consumption and you find, the oxygen consumption has gone goes down during sleep, and it also goes down during transcendental meditation. Hypo just means lower, so it's a lower metabolic rate. And it's unique in that you've got this very deep state of rest, but the brain is quite alive. It's not asleep. It's not showing the slow wave activity, but it's showing this more relaxed inner wakefulness activity.
Has this research also been conducted on other practices, other forms of meditation, or hatha yoga, yoga asanas, or the breathing exercises, pranayama?
Yeah.
And what were the findings in those areas?
If you look at, I just saw a recent paper where they compared the brain activity during TM. Dr. Fred Travis is an author on one of this, that looking at what happens during TM as compared to mindfulness. And there's a network in the brain called the default mode network, which involves specific areas of the brain. And it's usually seen when somebody is relaxed and more imaginative. And when you look at techniques like mindfulness and techniques that involve concentration, that system shuts down. Whereas during TM, that system seems to be more activated. So this is looking at brain imaging, looking at different areas of the brain. So that's one way you might distinguish these different techniques. There have been a lot of different studies on psychological measures. TM is probably studied better clinically than most other. I've seen a recent report where TM is really the only technique that's talked about as being effective in reducing blood pressure. But mindfulness had been studied extensively psychologically and with brain imaging. And there are specific changes that are accompanying it. The interesting thing is it's very hard to tell from brain scans what's going on. You think, oh, great, I'm looking in the brain. I can figure out what's happening. But let's say you concentrate, like say you have a technique that involves concentration, and you say, oh, well, this technique produced this change in the brain. After 6 weeks, there's more activity in this particular area. But you don't know whether that's some profound experience or just concentrating more, because it's a use it or lose it phenomenon. So if you want to play tennis or play some sport and you're playing a guitar or something, and you'll find that if you looked inside the brain, you would see that certain area of the brain, there are more neurons that are being developed in that area. So when you use something, there's more activity. And this activity will increase over time the more you use it. So it's hard to determine when you're looking at the brain scans what's really going on. Oh, so this area of the brain increased neurons. Okay, he concentrated a lot. So that could be what it is. So it gets tricky when you're looking at brain imaging. There are other kinds of measures where you're looking at creativity, intelligence, reaction time. One of the interesting things about TM, which is in terms of the physiology, this is again Dr. Fred Travis, but over time you see this kind of integration where on the one hand, they're showing the alpha wave activity, but then when they're doing a reaction time test, which normally wouldn't involve alpha activity because it's more focused and the alpha tends to go away when you get more focused. But now suddenly the alpha coherence is still high when they're doing these motor activities, which suggests that this is something that in terms of the development of consciousness, that you have that inner state of awareness while simultaneously being involved in activity.
So you're maintaining
Yeah,
a deep relaxation while engaged in dynamic activity.
exactly. And things like mindfulness, the idea is a little tricky because you don't know what the technique is referring to. Sometimes it refers to feeling the body or following the breath, but other times people use it, oh, I'm going to be mindful when I eat. And then you're trying to superimpose a mood on a particular activity. And it's unlikely that that has any real specific value because it could just be mood making. So that's a tricky thing there. Well, the great thing about TM and the great thing about this research is that you recognize that every experience changes the brain. So we concentrate, that'll change the brain. Play tennis, that'll change the brain. Listen to music, that'll change the brain. And so when you transcend, that's a new experience. And that new experience will create new pathways in the brain. So from the point of view of the research of higher states of consciousness, the notion is what technique can accelerate your growth toward higher states of consciousness. And if you imagine that that's a refinement of neurophysiological activity, that's somehow a restructuring of the brain so it's more effective in activity, then you're really interested in long-term changes. And you're interested in changes not during meditation, but outside of meditation. How is this person performing in business? How are they performing in physical activity? Are they performing better or worse? What's their brain activity while they're performing an activity? So there are different kinds of points of view. I would say there's a lot more research done on mindfulness these days, but it's just generally showing kind of a simple type of relaxation. TM, the research is quite interesting because it's looking more at this development of higher states of consciousness, not just relaxation, but how can we change the brain to be more effective, more intelligent, more creative, more effective in its activity. And that involves kind of a higher level of integration. So some of these other techniques might be sort of a beginner's approach, and TM is a more advanced approach. And especially as you go even into some of the more advanced techniques in TM, they show some of these changes more profoundly, either biochemically or in the EEG. So that kind of research is really defining a whole direction. Maslow used to call it self-actualization. Different people have used different words to explain the full development of mental potential in an individual. And in the Vedic tradition, it's usually talked about as higher states of consciousness.
Has there been any research specifically on people who subjectively experience higher states of consciousness?
Yeah, there has been some interesting research. Lynn Mason did some research years ago where she was looking at during sleep, witnessing during sleep.
Sorry, Keith, can you just define witnessing during sleep?
Oh, sorry. So this is an experience that's talked about in terms of higher states of consciousness where the individual is asleep. So they're lying on their back, completely relaxed, basically asleep, but somehow they have an inner light bulb of consciousness, of bliss going on inside them. So it's a very pleasurable, very enjoyable experience. And a number of people have experienced this during sleep, during activity. Athletes talk about being in the zone where they have this kind of amazing free flow of naturally doing things. Flow, people have used that word. So in this case, it would be something during sleep where you have this kind of inner wakeful consciousness along with the sleeping state. And you did see almost like two EEG patterns, one of sleep and then one of the kind of more awake consciousness superimposed upon the slower waves. So that was one early study like that. Dr. Travis has done a number of different studies, which I mentioned before, where he's tried to identify how this experience of growth of consciousness manifests in different tests. For example, like a reaction time test or something else. And typically there you do find this kind of increased EEG coherence, even in activity. So that's been his definition of higher states of consciousness. There are some biochemical changes, but I think we need more research to be able to define these higher states of consciousness. And you're always going by a subjective experience. So you're asking people what type of experience you're having. There's a guy called Newberg who's done a lot of research on nuns who have this beautiful experience of God. And he's found very interesting areas of the brain that light up. So different people are kind of approaching it from a different angle on whether they can identify these more spiritual type experiences that are only described subjectively in the literature, but which now we have the ability to study either through EEG or brain imaging or neurochemistry.
That's very interesting. In what way does this work connect our understanding of the Vedic literature and Vedic physiology with the modern scientific understanding of consciousness?
This was Marshi's great effort to get people to study, scientifically to study meditation. So all this notion of enlightenment was taken out of the realm of mysticism and faith and religion and brought into a scientific perspective. So we could actually identify higher states of consciousness as states in which an individual is functioning more effectively, achieving more, accomplishing more in life. So many people have looked at it from that perspective. Many psychologists, many philosophers have talked about this, but now for the first time in the history of the world, you can study it scientifically. The trick now is to identify people who have the state, which is tricky because you're looking at somebody's subjective experience and then correlating that subjective experience with specific physiological changes. And I would say the most powerful methodology that we'll have in the future will probably be biochemical, and it'll probably be DNA. Because ultimately, when you're looking at long-term changes in the physiology, it's all orchestrated by DNA, which is this beautiful molecule in virtually every cell, which determines everything in our lives. The formation of the body, everything that goes on. Different people are born with a different kind of genetics. And what we know now is that longevity and better health, some people are born with genes that are really good and they live a long time. There's a funny story in a book where the lady is told by her doctor, you got to stop smoking. And she says, well, that's what my last 3 doctors told me, but they're already dead, So some people have those genes that are just amazing, that they can live to 95, 100 or whatever, and even abuse the body in some way. So we don't completely understand that. We just know that some people have that. Much more likely is a larger group of people that are living a good lifestyle. Sometimes these are in certain areas of the world, and we can identify their diet, maybe a Mediterranean diet, some sort of diet which has characteristics of not overeating certain things and just eating kind of in a very regulated way, that they have exercise. Social contact is hugely important. And a world in which there's not overwhelmed by stress and which their sleep habits are good. But ultimately, it comes down to the DNA. And ultimately, it comes down to what can turn a gene on or off. And now we've seen some very interesting studies on meditation where we find that on transcendental meditation, other techniques, where the experience of meditation, particularly over a period of time, will change what's called gene expression. So say you have a set of genes these are little bits of information, little molecules that when they turn on, they lead to a protein, and that protein changes the whole metabolic pathway. The genes will determine your eye color and everything about you, ultimately. And so in this particular case, there are certain things that'll turn genes on and off. So foods will turn genes on and off. But it turns out meditation will also turn genes on and off. Exercise will turn genes on and off. Sleep patterns will turn genes on and off. If we really study the growth of higher states of consciousness, what we're seeing is the development of a more ideal gene expression, where these genes are being turned on and off in just the perfect way to maintain ideal health. I mean, there's lifespan and there's health span. It's great to live long, but it's not great to live long if you're not in a good state of health. And meditation is a huge, important part of that. That doesn't mean meditation does everything. You still have to eat well. You still have to exercise. You still have to sleep well. But it is a major contributor to longevity, to cardiovascular health. There have been some major studies on cardiovascular health, which really show that TM reduces heart attacks in subjects who have already had some heart attack, and they were studied over time. And those that started the practice of TM had a huge improvement compared to those that didn't do TM.
In that study, did they compare also with other forms of meditation?
No, they just did TM. It was a study supported by NIH grant, very well-controlled, random design, just beautifully done. There have been previous studies. There was a study done by Skip Alexander at Harvard University where he looked at elderly people and compared with mindfulness and other techniques. And TM came out a lot better. They had lower blood pressure. They had cognitive improvement in general compared to the other techniques.
Going back to what you said about DNA and switching the genes on and off, are you saying then that the regular practice of meditation can effectively change something as fundamental as DNA, or at least functionally,
it's been done.
if not materially?
It's been done. Studies have been done. It's very clear that TM does it. Other meditation techniques also do it too. So we're talking about an area of the body that's very sensitive to the type of experiences we have. Likewise, if you exercise or don't exercise, that'll turn genes on and off. If you eat certain foods, that'll do the same thing. And if you have different kinds of sleep patterns. So these kind of 4 basic areas of life are all important, along with social interaction. There are many things that will change gene expression. It's much more flexible than we had thought. Now people are talking about longevity, especially this health span, as really a preventative approach. Learn meditation when you're young so you can counteract the bad effects of stress. Exercise regularly so that you can enliven certain genes that will help your physiology better. I mean, number one cardiovascular risk factor is lack of exercise. Hugely important. Diet, we now know. Food is so important. We didn't realize how important it was before. Now that we've studied the microbiome, we realize that you have this whole, almost like another organ in the gut, which are all these bacteria, and they produce thousands of chemicals that enter the bloodstream and affect every part of the body. The operation of that microbiome is entirely dependent on what you eat. If you change your diet from vegetarian to meat, it'll change the ecology of that microbiome. And we now know that a lot of diseases, scientists are trying to link so many different diseases to the state of the microbiome. So it's far more important than we ever realized.
Speaking more on that topic of the microbiome and how it influences not only health, but also our moods and our consciousness.
Yeah.
Modern science is becoming more aware and acknowledging the mind-body connection and the interconnectedness and how they both affect each other.
Right.
In terms of health and well-being, how has your research also contributed to that?
Well, I haven't specifically looked at the microbiome. I've reviewed papers on it. I've written articles reviewing different aspects of the microbiome.
On mind-body connection.
Very interesting because there's something called the gut-brain axis, which nobody knew about before, in which the immune system, the nervous system, and the gut microbiome, along with many other systems, are all connected together. In your microbiome, you can influence the brain directly by what's called the vagus nerve. That impulses can go that way. Or the microbiome can produce thousands of different chemicals that can go out and can affect the body, and some can enter the blood-brain barrier and affect the brain too. We're seeing many, many different ways by which the microbiome can affect your mind and body and your entire state of health. So that suddenly has raised diet up to a very important level.
So now, how do you see the relationship between science and spirituality evolving in this context of meditation and the development of higher states of consciousness?
It's just gone crazy. People are really interested in it now. There's so much more research going on trying to identify what the scientific correlates of spirituality, what they are. I mean, I remember seeing one article, Where is God in the Brain? And this guy Newman, who I mentioned to you, did a number of papers like that. So people are entered into a world that's never been entered before, where they actually are trying to explain spirituality, God, all in terms of the growth of the brain and how it develops. Also, I think people realize that for health, spirituality and more positive style of thinking, more positive social interactions also have a big impact on health. So from all sides, people are recognizing that spirituality has a physiological basis and it's important for all aspects of life, whether it's health or longevity.
And speaking of this upsurge in the interest in spirituality and scientific study, what do you think would be the most promising avenues for scientific study when it comes to spirituality and higher states of consciousness?
I think further research on the neurochemistry, neurophysiology of the growth of higher states of consciousness is huge, because suddenly you take all these ancient texts and all these ancient descriptions of people having these experiences, and now you can validate them in a very real and concrete way. So that gives an enormous change in our attitude toward different traditions, spiritual traditions. You can also go more deeply into these traditions and look at other techniques and how they might change. Like you mentioned pranayama in the beginning. And sometimes there's this pranayama where people alternate the breath. And I've seen studies where it shows that it alternates the alpha wave dominance in one part of the brain to the other. So almost any technique could be studied, whether it's yoga, whether it's pranayama, whether it's meditation, and they can be studied on a very simple basis. Ayurveda is another huge area, Chinese traditional medicine. There's so many areas that we've kind of not paid attention to because they weren't scientifically validated. So once you scientifically validate them, they come into the mainstream and people are interested. Can these be used to increase longevity? Can they be used to improve health? So I think that's huge. And then you can go a step further and get into the whole notion of collective consciousness and how groups of people meditating could affect the world. And it's not an area that people are very comfortable with. The paradigm is just when you get that notion of spirituality not only affecting the individual, but the group, that you're kind of stretching people's boundaries at that point. But there have been quite a large number of studies showing that these groups can have an effect on very specific parameters. And now we'd like to know, what are the mechanics? Is there a field of consciousness that's connecting people? It's been postulated for thousands of years, but it's not something anybody can measure. It's not like electromagnetism where you can measure it. So what is this field of consciousness that's talked about in virtually every spiritual tradition? Can we measure it? When you're meditating, what's happening? Are you coming in contact with it? Is there a way you can amplify the positive effects of it? Enormous amount of possibilities of research once you get into it, and not just physiology, but physics, chemistry. There's so many different areas that now are going to have to kind of reevaluate what's going on. It sort of gets to the very roots of science, the very roots of how we view the world. I always think it's interesting. You get somebody like a physicist, and let's say the physicist is part of a religion. Maybe he's Jewish, maybe he's Catholic. For most of the week, he's talking about laws of physics, and he's describing the world in terms of very specific laws of physics. But then on whether it's a Saturday or Sunday, he suddenly is talking about and believing that the world is run by God and that it's a spiritual world, it's a religious world. Is he schizophrenic? I mean, how could he have two views of the world, very different, completely opposed to each other? And which view is right? It's the same physicist, brilliant. And yet he's one day saying it's a law of physics, and the next day he's saying, no, God is doing everything. So I think that's kind of something which we need to bridge, that gap, because it's a little bit schizophrenic how the world is being operated. That's something that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi was a real pioneer in trying to encourage research and trying to reinterpret all the different spiritual traditions in terms of modern physics. And great achievements were made in that area. And it's just a question of kind of the world looking at it, accepting it. And it's hard to change a paradigm. It's very, very hard. But that kind of depth is there. It's just kind of ripe for the awakening. And it's just at a certain point when more and more people can go deeper, like the DNA research, or somebody can do some physics research or this collective consciousness research. Who knows what it'll be, but at some point, these two divergent areas of life, the objective and the subjective, could be integrated. And that would really be great for the world.
In the last episode of Simplest State, I was speaking with Dr. Craig Pearson, and he'd written a book, as you know, A Supreme Awakening, in which he had collated these marvelous experiences of people throughout history from around the world, experiencing definitely what could be described as higher states of consciousness. But until now, all of this has been somewhat shrouded in mysticism, as you say, or it's poetry, or it's something that's more abstract. It doesn't seem to be tangible. Yet we see it throughout history, since time immemorial. Would you say that now, finally, science has validated the existence of higher states of consciousness, that higher states of consciousness, higher states of creativity, higher states of functioning do in fact exist and are natural and attainable?
Yeah, I would say we've definitely begun that journey. It probably has to go a lot further. People are very divided. Most people think of consciousness as an epiphenomenon of the brain, and that's something that is quite in contrast to these older traditions which speak about consciousness as the source of matter. So you still have these very, very different viewpoints. It's funny, they come together in practical areas. Somebody wants to reduce their blood pressure, and they think, oh, well, I'm going to learn meditation to help reduce my blood pressure. And once they start meditating and have these inner experiences, suddenly they become more open to the idea of consciousness as a field which underlies everything, and you get a shift. Sometimes it's an athlete who wants to perform better and recognizes that, oh, if I meditate, I could actually do better in my athletic performance, or a businessman or somebody else. Changing the world is not going to be easy. It'll take some time. I think a lot has been done already. Different people talk about where we are on the curve, how close we are, and it's anybody's guess where we are at this stage. Some people are super opposed to it, and some people, top people, love it. So it's a kind of a polarized state right now, but more open than ever before and more research than ever before. There's an interesting study. It was done as a PhD thesis by Carla Brown. She was at Harvard, and she took one of these studies that was done on groups meditating, doing transcendental meditation and a more advanced technique. And it was done in Israel and Lebanon. And at that time, many years ago, they had groups gathering. And when the groups came and meditated, the violence and war deaths went down. It was supported by a foundation. It had an independent panel examining it. It was a really good study. It was published in a good journal. But it completely was against the paradigm. So she did her PhD thesis on taking that paper, published paper, and giving it to politicians in Washington and seeing how they react. And pretty much across the board, most people wouldn't even read it. They wouldn't even look at it. So you still have got this very strong attitude that these two worlds are separated. They can never come together.
And just when you started talking, you talked about this reality of consciousness underlying everything.
Right.
And I did want to ask you, because the physicist Schrödinger said, every man's world picture is and always remains a construct of his mind and cannot be proved to have any other existence. And the American author Robert Anton Wilson said, the only realities we know are the ones our brain manufactures. Our brain receives millions of signals every minute, and we organize them into holograms which we project outside ourselves and call reality. Now, in that context, I wanted to ask you, as a physiologist, does the activity of the material brain produce consciousness, or does consciousness produce the physiology and the brain?
Well, Dr. Tony Nader, PhD, MD, has written a book, Consciousness is All There Is, which kind of explains this in terms of Vedic philosophy. He tries very much to bridge the gap. And many other people, Dr. Hagelin, Dr. Domesh, a whole bunch of scientists in this world have made this attempt. Schrodinger was one of them. You can find wonderful quotes from top scientists. When you look at the subtlest level of physics, quantum physics, you come up with this sort of paradox. And that is, on the one hand, the world is all possibilities. You try to identify a particle, and it's not a particle, it's a superposition of waves. It's all possibilities. It defies logic, what it is from a quantum mechanical standpoint. But the minute somebody tries to measure it, when you introduce consciousness into the equation, it collapses and it becomes a particle. So most physicists, not every physicist, but I would say a good number of physicists are really puzzled by this. And they're like, well, what is the role of consciousness? Because up to now, consciousness has been left out. Just as much easier just to leave it out. So suddenly now they're kind of stuck with, wait a minute, how do I explain the universe without introducing consciousness? But you still have the notion of many, many scientists that consciousness is a product of the brain and not the source of the brain itself, a field. So that's a big, big step going from there, because we really don't know what consciousness is. Nobody has proven it one way or the other. All the ancient traditions completely go against modern science and talk about it as a unified field. But now suddenly you get into modern physics and wow, it sounds a lot more like modern physics. Unified field theory is a lot similar. There's a unified field that underlies everything. It has a lot of the attributes of consciousness. Why couldn't you just call it consciousness? But that's a kind of a line which a lot of people won't cross. So there's still two sides to this. But it's wonderful that many top physicists, many top thinkers have started to explore this and to talk about consciousness as a unified field of the laws of nature. Physics finally kind of unified itself. It's had all these different approaches, and now there are 4 basic forces, but the latest theories give this notion of a unified field, which unifies gravity, weak, strong, and electromagnetism. And there's still controversy over that, but it's a huge step forward. Einstein wanted that. Everybody wanted that. When you get a more deeper understanding of physics, it helps, because that deeper understanding explores a field where everything is so amazing. There's a phenomenon called entanglement where, particles can communicate over long distances and nobody understands why. You can take something like helium and put it in a superfluid state and it suddenly behaves totally differently. There's no resistance. It flows forever. It has all these qualities that are unlike anything anybody's ever seen. We're right on the edge of seeing that, but still there's resistance there. So
there is some coming together between the mystical, the spiritual, and the science. Compare these two quotes. The Yoga Vasishta of the ancient Vedic literature states, even as from the waking state there is no materiality in the object seen in a dream, this world appears to be material, yet in reality it is pure consciousness. And compare that with what the great physicist Niels Bohr commented, everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real.
Once quantum mechanics came along, everything changed. It was like this mind-blowing change. And some people disregarded the kind of implications, and the greats really loved to explore it. So we live in a world where so many wonderful things are coming together in terms of our understanding of the universe, but it's still polarized. You read these quotes and you love it, but you actually go to a university and try to talk about it, it gets tricky. People are still entrenched in their worlds.
How has your own meditation practice influenced your life and your work and your research?
I don't think I would have done any of it without that. For me, meditation was kind of a foundation for everything I did in the world. My experience in meditation taught me that this was something valuable and real, and it made me want to study it in terms of I could explain it in neurophysiological terms. So I was fortunate to meet Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when I was very young, and that allowed me to start at a young age and really reevaluate everything in terms of consciousness. And many of that generation, of the generation you and I are in, learned TM at an early age and have been doing it for many years. So there's kind of a whole group of people that have been fascinated by this. And now meditation is something that's an accepted word. I mean, you can go into a big corporation, there's a meditation room. If you talk about meditation, people aren't scared about it. They're completely accepting of it. So now people recognize meditation as something very, very valuable and important. Huge changes have taken place over these last 50 years where there's been this enormous recognition of why meditation is a valuable tool for everyone. And certainly Maharishi was one of the great founders of this in connecting the objective with the subjective world and really encouraging research. And I just happened to be at the right place and at the right time and was able to do a lot of this. So that was just a fortunate moment for me.
So it was more that you were a seeker
Yeah.
who said, let's take a look at meditation from a scientific
Yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
rather than a scientist who was saying, let's take a look at meditation and see what it is.
I have to admit, that's what motivated me was, I really had the experiences. So that made me feel very confident that it would be fun to study it.
And for you, what has been the most rewarding aspect of your work in this field?
I'd have to be totally honest. It's working with Maharishi, who was such a brilliant genius of consciousness. We would have meetings with Nobel Prize winners, 2 or 3 Nobel Prize winners with Maharishi. And just like you're reading those 2 quotes, that's what it was like. On the one hand, Maharishi's giving this beautiful, pure Vedic knowledge. On the other hand, you're hearing these brilliant scientists who are genuinely interested. They're not coming there to argue or fight, but they're there to learn. And they're offering from their side what the most modern interpretation is. And those were amazing meetings in the area of knowledge, to watch this knowledge unfold so the subjective world and the objective world could be unified into one simplified understanding of how nature works.
It's like being in on the ground floor of emerging knowledge.
It was, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And all recorded on video, all documented and resulting in huge changes in our thinking around the world. So I think that for me has just been an amazing experience to watch the history of consciousness unfold in our lifetime.
That's what it is. You were living history at the time.
I was part of it. It was a joy.
You pioneered this research. You've written several books. What will be next for Dr. Wallace?
Mostly focusing on the field of integrative medicine, where you combine modern medicine with the ancient traditions, and particularly Ayurveda. I'm very much interested in helping improve health and longevity around the world. So meditation is obviously a major component of that. But I also feel there's wonderful knowledge there, also ancient knowledge that we haven't really used. And so I'm very interested in learning more about that and also providing an educational platform so doctors, scientists, students can learn more about how to prevent disease, how to apply these ancient knowledge in a scientific manner. So that's been my focus for the last many years, really, really trying to see that we can have this knowledge brought out in a very practical way in the world today.
Wonderful. Is there anything you would say to anyone who is skeptical about the benefits of practicing a regular meditation of whatever sort?
The great thing is it's an experience. So anybody can have that experience and prove it to themselves. And people might start with mindfulness or they might start with some guided meditation. But I think once you get on the path and you realize you want to go deeper and deeper, then from my point of view, transcendental meditation is the most powerful technique and the advanced programs. So you can start with whatever it takes to get you interested, but then at some point you really want to have deeper and deeper experiences. You're therefore looking for what is the most effective technique. And it's a combination of having meditation and also a good, healthy lifestyle too, because you need to have that healthy lifestyle to support those experiences. The physiology is integrated. So I love the combination of meditation, Ayurveda, or meditation, traditional medicine. TM is my preference, Ayurveda is my preference, but there's so many different opportunities in that area where people can start. And then they kind of have to experiment and find out for themselves what works best for them. They can look at the research, which is very nice, it's out there. And I think the practicality is having a teacher. TM is very good because you have a teacher that was trained by Maharishi, and have that teacher be able to teach you on a personal level how to meditate, and then to be able to ask further questions. Because once you get into this, it's just a wealth of knowledge, and it's a marvelous thing to keep doing. So I'm very much oriented toward helping the education process and bringing this knowledge to young people all over the world so they at least have an opportunity to start young, avoid all that horrible stress and strain that's out there in the world today.
Well said. I think avoiding all that horrible stress is a very good way for us to end this conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Dr. Wallace. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ron.